What is going on, everybody? Welcome to another LUMIX Live. I've got a lot of fun stuff to talk about today, some cool stuff to show you guys from this past weekend when I took the S5 Mark II out to one of my favorite spots here in Austin for riding motorcycles. Really just kind of like talk about the tracking focus and 30 frames per second and stuff like that, but I know already we've seen a couple of really cool questions and we saw some questions beforehand, so we're also going to be looking at some of the image quality out of the camera. And now that there is a decent raw processing software out available in Silky Pix for it, we're also going to be taking a look at that program while we wait for Adobe Camera Raw and things like Lightroom and Capture One and those other programs to natively support RAW footage. So we've got a whole bunch of stuff to cover today. We're also going to be going over a lot of the stuff in the camera. I've got my S5 Mark II or my other S5 Mark II hooked up here over HDMI, so we'll be able to go through the menus. We'll talk about things like shear overlay and red frame or not red frame, night mode, all those kinds of things. So lots of cool stuff to talk about. If this is your first LUMIX Live that you're joining us, welcome. These are weekly broadcasts that we do every Thursday at 2 p.m. Eastern Time to just talk about tech and cameras and the industry and the interviews with other photographers and videographers. You name it, we're trying to cover it on this platform. And really just add a platform out here for all of you to be able to talk directly to our brand. Cameras like the S5 Mark II would not exist without the feedback that all of you provide. We may not be the fastest to move company in the world, but when we do, we try to do it right. And really the S5 Mark II and the GH6 and a number of the other cameras that we've come out with are that exact result of these kinds of communications and conversations that we have. So with that, yeah, welcome to the stream. If you have a question, make sure to tag at LUMIX Cameras before the question, like you can see some others are doing. That just helps me see it on my side, and yeah, we can get through them in the broadcast. Before we go too far into it, I want to remind you, especially for all of you getting new cameras, at least for here in the US, because it's a region I can speak confidently about here, is LUMIX Pro Services. We have Red and Platinum tier here in the United States. Red is free if you've bought a LUMIX camera or you're purchasing a LUMIX camera. Make sure to take a look at LUMIX Pro Services. It's free in the Red tier. Get yourself registered on it. In the US, you can follow the QR code or just type in the URL that's there. Get yourself registered, all that kind of fun stuff. Platinum tier is if you're someone who's looking for that next level of service and support on the back end. You get all of the Red tier stuff, so you get the 3-year extended warranty, but on top of that, you get things like the 2-day turnaround when it comes to repairs and service that are under warranty, with next day shipping both ways, 20% off out of warranties if you drop cameras, all that kind of stuff. You get annual sensor cleanings, firmware updates, all that kind of stuff. If you don't want to be handling it yourself, you can send it into the service team and get it taken care of. And you also get an exclusive membership hotline. So if you're someone who would much prefer to speak to a person on the phone to troubleshoot an issue that you may have, you have access to that. So be sure to take a look at those. And yeah, at your leisure, we have links down in the description. And if you're not from the US, if you're from outside of the US region, we have links to the global portal so you can see what's available in your region for your country. So let's see here. So I did throw a poll in the chat here to see just a little bit of a feel how many of you are eager or already got your S5 Mark IIs, but then also how many of you are still undecided. I would love to hear from everyone that's undecided. What are the things that you want to hear and get information about to maybe help make that decision for you? These are the platforms that why it exactly it exists. You know, I want to be able to answer questions as direct as I can with you. So let us see here. So I see Dave's comment there about the notice that did go out that pre-orders are exceeding the demand. So if you haven't got a pre-order in, make sure you've already on that point, get yourself on a list with a dealer of your choice that you're looking at, that you trust, that you want to get an order in with to try to secure out of that first shipment. But yes, demand has been definitely exceeding what we anticipated. So if you're not on the pre-order list, you make sure you're trying to get on that list if you're someone who likes to have this equipment right away and right up front. Let's see here. There's two questions that disappeared from the chat when the stream went live. I have them written down, so we'll address them a little bit later. But let's see here. Steve asks, I received my S5 Mark II today and I tried to figure out autofocus settings for bird photography. Do you have any guides or recommendations, as it doesn't seem to work as well as it seems in video? Yes, I do. Actually, very specifically, I do. Because when it comes to things like bird photography, wildlife, or some of the action motorsport stuff like I was shooting, there's a lot of things that you kind of have to keep in mind with the way our system works. And this is true for pretty much any interchangeable lens camera. Focusing systems out of the box are typically tuned for the average user. So that means that they may not be tuned to be ultra fast, but they're tuned that in most scenarios, especially even in photography, they're going to provide the kind of biggest coverage you can get across the board. When you go into specialty styles of photography, that's where you start looking to say, okay, do I need this to be responding faster? Do I need it to actually slow down a bit? How sticky or how responsive do I want the focusing system to be? And luckily, for anyone that's been using the LUMIX systems for a while now, we have all of those controls in the camera, and we've actually made them a bit easier to access and given a little bit better kind of understanding of what it is that they do for it. So we're going to jump over to my S5 Mark II that I have here, and let's take a look at some of those menu options. So let me just make sure my audio is, yeah, there it is. So when it comes to wildlife photography or any kind of fast-paced motion, as Steve points out, if you do not do anything to the camera, if you just take it right out of the box, throw a lens on it, and start going to go photograph, you may notice that, like, for ultra fast-paced stuff, it needs a little bit of tuning, and we've built this in with the camera. So if you're in any of the main modes here, so for photography or for videography, you'll see that there's a focus option specifically in for each of these modes, whether you're in photo or video. Now, what you'll do is go to AF custom settings, and this will only activate when you're in continuous focus mode. So you're in AFC for the continuous mode. But once you go in here, you'll see that you have a number of parameters that you can play around with for your style of shooting. So by default out of the box, you'll see that it is set relatively middle of the road here. So AF sensitivity is set to be pretty responsive, but not ultra responsive, but also not ultra locked on, in a manner that is designed so that, one, when you just take the camera and point it at a subject, it's going to focus on that subject and it's going to lock there. But if you're trying to tell the camera, I need you to be much faster because I want to go from here to here, that's my intent, I want you to go there fast, this is where you want to start playing with some of these settings. You also have switching sensitivity. How likely is the camera to say, oh, hey, new subject in frame, I need to change my focus point? And then motion subject prediction. This is something that's big for the wildlife birding photography, as well as the motorsport and action style photography. Even general sports photography, this is a bigger point. These are the three components for the photography side. But what you'll notice is that while I can change each of these individually, so I can make this as custom as I like, there are also different sets that are preloaded into the camera. So as we said, set 1 is default out of the box. It's versatile, basic settings for general types of photography. General portraiture, kind of snapshot level kind of stuff, and even some higher level work like event photography, this will be perfectly fine. But when you're going to go in and say, in this case, I want to photograph things like trains, airplanes, anything that's moving in a constant direction at a constant speed, you'll see that we have set 2. Set 2 changes your AF sensitivity. It makes it more responsive. It also changes the switching sensitivity, which is when a new subject comes into frame. So it says, okay, stay more locked on, but move faster in its ability to move through the frame, and then motion subject prediction can stay constant because you're photographing a subject that moves at a constant speed. It's not variable in that kind of mode. But we also have set 3. Set 3 here is for subjects that move randomly and while other subjects may be in the frame. So think, as our examples are, is football, basketball, volleyball, stuff like that, where you know that you want the image to be moving fast. You want the subject switching sensitivity to, it's okay to move. You're trying to jump around, but the motion is what's going to be very unpredictable. So we have set 3. AF sensitivity is going to stay more locked on to the target that you initially select. The switching sensitivity is going to be higher because you're moving and you're constantly shifting where that subject is in the frame. You may be jumping from subject to subject. And then motion prediction is set to variable, meaning that your subject is changing directions very fast. So you need the camera to be able to say, hey, this subject's starting to go that way, so I want the system to know that that's where I have to start changing my focus. But then when it comes to like wildlife and motorsports, this is where I love set 4. And all of my shooting with the camera has always been in set 4 when it comes to tracking motorcycles, which is my kind of personal hobby. And for a lot of wildlife and birding photographers, this can also be probably the better selection. You may be realistically between somewhere in set 3 and set 4, but that's why we allow you to come in here and change each of these. So with set 4, because with motorcycles, they change speed going through a lot of different scenarios, and the subjects can change very significantly from point A to point B. This is where your sensitivity stays locked, basically zeroed out. You can tweak this left or right if you want it to be more locked on. Your switching sensitivity becomes more responsive, and your moving subject prediction becomes very responsive and very variable. So if you're someone that's going to be focusing on, say, little birds or bird in flight, things like that, go into these menus, spend a little bit of time, get to know how the system responds, and play with each of these different settings. Because like I said, for a lot of wildlife and birding photographers, you may find that somewhere between set 3 and set 4 may give you a pretty good result. Now, the only difference between these two really is just that AF sensitivity. But what we did with this camera is we've also added you to click the display button, and it gives you basically the information as to, well, what do each of these modes mean? AF sensitivity, this adjusts refocusing sensitivity for the scene when other objects cross in front. So if you're doing bird in flight and they're going behind trees, this is something you may want to play with so that it's not pulling that tree in front as it moves through. But you can also come in here and say, well, switching sensitivity, why is this set to responsive? Well, this is how fast the subject's moving up, down, left, right in the frame. So as it's moving through the frame, how sensitive do you want it to switch through the subjects as they're moving through the actual viewfinder in the display? And then, as I said, motion prediction. This is just how much strength do you want it to have for variability? Each of these settings can be independently controlled, as I said. So for Steve, for wildlife and birding, play around with some of these settings. I recommend trying set 3 to start with, because a lot of times you don't want that subject, kind of jumping from the subject you initially chose to a tree and back and forth. You want it to stay pretty locked on. But I've had great luck with set 4 when I'm doing motorsports with human detection, and since I'm not using animal, it's obviously a little different. I've had great success with set 4 when subjects move from in frame to behind trees through a corner. And we're going to take a look at some photos like that in a little bit. So hopefully that addressed your question, Steve. Where was the next question here? There it was. Can you discuss if any of the high-resolution modes is also suited for handheld situations? Wex claimed in their video review that 48 megapixel mode was possible handheld. Yeah, I can comment on this. To make it abundantly clear, we, as Panasonic, do not advertise the S5 Mark II as having handheld high-resolution shot mode. I want to set that very clear. A dealer, a manufacturer, a dealer or reviewer that comes to that conclusion on their own, that is their own independent opinion of what the system is. But from our standpoint, we did not design the system to be handheld at this time. I'm hoping that, hey, maybe firmware shines on us. Maybe it would be cool if we could do it, but truthfully, I don't know. You would need to go to something like a GH6 if you wanted handheld high-resolution shot. That being said, if you're someone that's looking at high-resolution shot mode, we have a couple of different options here. To start with, you access high-resolution shot mode on the top dial of the camera. So on the top left shoulder is where you can change into high-resolution shot. And when you come into here and you hit high resolution shot mode, you'll see that you have a couple different choices now. You have picture quality, which is combined in this case. This just says if you have in standard photo modes, if you have the camera set to do RAW plus JPEG, it'll carry that over into high resolution shot. But you can also independently set this. If you're someone who only wants to do the RAW file, you don't need or want the JPEG in high res, you can set it that way. By default, I believe it's set as combined. Then there's picture size. You have 96 and 48 megapixel. The reason we have both of these here, an ultra high res and a kind of relatively high res image, is strictly because of size. There are some users and some photographers out there that aren't going to need a 12,000 by 8,000 image. You're not going to need 96 megapixel. You want something that's maybe a little more manageable as far as the size and resolution goes. So cool. We've got you a 48 megapixel version of high resolution shot. They're taken in the same method, so there's not really anything different between them other than the output resolution that you get. You also have simultaneously record normal shot. What this will do is that it'll take the high res shot, and then it'll also save out one of the standard, 24 megapixel RAW files. So pretty self-explanatory. Shutter delay. This is perfect if you're someone who doesn't have a either remote cable for shutter release, or you're not using the mobile device, the Bluetooth connection for Bluetooth remote. You have the ability to just program in a delay. And then motion blur processing. This is where some people start to come in and say, oh, well, maybe you can do handheld with it. And again, we don't advertise that. Maybe some others feel that you can do it, but it's not something that we are saying that this camera can do. But what motion blur processing does is it takes the image in mode 1 and it leaves motion blur in the way it's shown. So if you're doing, a high resolution landscape and the trees are blowing and the water in, say, a stream or a creek are rushing, it's going to leave that motion blur effect in there. So you're going to see motion blur in the image. But then if you go to mode 2, this will take the frames as it's coming in, pick a reference frame, and then it will lock certain parts of the image in as that resolution or as that kind of motion effect. So this will intelligently do it in camera. It's able to mask out individual parts of it. And it basically just allows you to do things like normal landscape photography where the trees are blowing and have the trees not be all blurry because they moved. This can also, it's pretty effective when it comes to water motion or things like, say, a jet crossing in the sky. You're able to have this use mode 2 and it minimizes any kind of blur or artifacting that you see in that kind of style image. So lots and lots of functionality when it comes to the high resolution shot mode. And again, as a reminder, for those that have never used this before, or you've heard other brands with some sort of concept of this, we do it all in camera. So the file you get at the end is a raw file that is 96 or 48 megapixel that is all done right on camera. So you're not having to use extra software. You don't have to, wait until you get home to see, well, do those images actually work? Does everything stitch together okay? We design it so that while you're in the field, you can actually get the results and see how this stuff works. Let's hear. FC says, is it possible to use strobe flash with LiveView Composite when available? So if you've worked with LiveView Composite on any of our previous cameras, the answer is yes and no. Flash it is 100% able to be used with LiveView Composite in the sense that if you want to do a composite imagery where you're firing off flash, at a couple different times, you're going to be doing that off camera. So you're going to, take a flash in hand, walk around, pop it over here, pop it over there. Cool. But if you have it on camera and you go to take the picture, it's going to fire the flash once. Actually, no, it won't fire the flash once because you're going to be an electronic shutter. So you have to do flash firing off camera. That's something as simple as, taking something like I have a Godox flash that I use regularly, literally just putting it in the power I want, walking around and firing the flash that way. But yeah, it 100% works. In fact, Matt Fraser has some really cool images that he shared with me in LiveView Composite on the original S5. that are stunning, because you can do that stuff where you can get your subject to really pop in the frame and then let the background kind of just do its thing with like blurred lights or light trails or star trails, all that kind of stuff. So it is doable, but you're doing it all off camera flash. Dennis says, will the battery grip and third-party L bracket accessories of the S5 fit the S5 Mark II and the Mark IIX? So I can 100% say that the battery grip 100% fits the S5 Mark II and the S5 Mark IIX. We did that intentionally. It is the exact same part number as the original S5. As far as L brackets go, the only difference that's going to come up with an L bracket is in the area of where the strap lug is. Depending on how it was designed, because on the S5 we used the eyelet design, so it would have the two posts that stick out, and then you'd have, you know, kind of like a ring piece that attaches to it, versus the S5 Mark II, which is integrated tabs for your straps. That's the only area where L brackets may be hit or miss. I currently use, in fact, I don't have it because it's on my gimbal outside. On my other S5 Mark II, I have a small rig L bracket that was designed for the S5 that I just popped right onto my Mark II, and it works perfectly fine. The only thing that I can't do is I can't set the L bracket part of it flush against the camera because of where the strap lug is for the left-hand side of the camera. But other than that, it works perfectly fine. You don't really have to worry too much about that. Cages, on the other hand, that's totally different story. Cages do have to be designed new. Condor Blue, Small Rig, 8sin, Zacuto, they all making cages for the S5 Mark II because the camera's taller than the original S5. Let's see here. What's the S5 Mark IIX about? The S5 Mark IIX, a blacked out version of the S5 Mark II that offers some different hardware and different software capabilities for those that need much higher end video performance out of their camera. So think of the two platforms as, if you're someone who is, say, a hybrid shooter, but you sit maybe a little bit more leaning towards photography, the S5 Mark II is going to be the perfect one for you. Or if you're just someone new getting into this platform, the S5 Mark II is the great way to go. You get all of the core basic video functions. You get 6K video recording, you get 4K 60, you get 4K 24, you get the PDAF system, you get live view composite, the high resolution shot, every little thing that we talk about normally on the camera. But if you're someone who wants higher end video features, you can get an SFU upgrade and get the RAW over HDMI functionality. If you know that you need things like ProRes, SSD recording, you want all intra codecs, that's where you have to go to the Mark IIX. And the Mark IIX will also allow you to do things like wired and wireless IP streaming. So that's where the two kind of differences are. We were able to make an S5 Mark II and listen to the feedback that a lot of users have given us over the years that, look, I want a camera, but I'm never going to use RAW. I don't need ProRes. I don't need all intra recording. I don't want to pay for those things if I'm never going to use them. So cool, we made a camera that you don't have to pay for them. Those that do use those, well, we got the X model, or we've got the S5 Mark II with the SFU upgrade for RAW. So it's all about choice, is what was designed specifically in these cameras. Let's see here. What can I expect from the rolling shutter correction for stills? Cool. We're going to actually talk about that in a moment. Once I get through a couple more questions, I'll jump over to the images that I took this past weekend. These are panning shots of motorcycles. So, lucky enough to pick up my new S5 Mark II. What is the best way to report bugs? When using 120 Hertz EVF, there's an intermittent issue with the EVF cropping the whole viewfinder in playback mode. You can shoot, Steven, you can send an email to lumixlive@us.panasonic.com, and I will happily pass any of that kind of stuff on to our team. Alan says, I'm curious what advances in technology convinced Panasonic that the new PDAF had minimal effect on image quality, since this was the main reason to stick with contrast AF. Very good question. So as we've been developing the processor and the image side of the technology, we were finally able to, with the new engine through the L2 partnership, we were able to come up with the proper combination of sensor hardware and processing technology that allowed us to overcome that issue. Basically, to put this in the most simple terms, new processor gave us a lot more functionality and flexibility when it comes to working with the actual image coming off the sensor, that we don't have the concerns anymore now that we had before about the photosite issues, the noise issues, the potential banding issues that you can get with PDAF, because you have to basically take those pixels and mask them out, and you have to do that in real time with video. But yeah, our system, our engineers have been working for a long time on this, on how to do it the right way. So like I said at the beginning, when we do release something, we take the time to actually test and evaluate and work. And as long as it hits our image quality standards that we have and our reliability standards that we have, then we're comfortable to release. We don't want to release something, especially like a PDAF update. We wouldn't want to release a PDAF update that was only okay. You know, we wanted to target as high up the chain as we could possibly go in our first iteration. And if you've been with Panasonic long enough, you know that with Panasonic and with LUMIX as the brand, we support our product. So you know that firmware updates are coming. We've already talked about, you know, the LiveView Composite update that's going to be coming because that wasn't necessarily ready at launch. And we support our cameras that way. Steve says, S5 user here, not ordering the Mark II. If pre-ordered the Mark II X, your poll didn't have that as an option. Yes, very true. Since the Mark II X is still a little while away, I didn't figure it was that big to put in there. But I'll start another poll maybe halfway through the stream just to see about the X model. Would it be possible to enable waveforms for stills as well? I wish. I want waveforms in stills personally, and if all of you keep asking for it and show us that it's something you want and prove some of the points that it's valuable in photography as well, the more I can get people, you know, on board with that kind of idea. So yeah, all right, let's actually take a look at some of these images here. So I wanted to take the S5 Mark II out, and I've been doing this for quite some time now, actually since about August, I think I've been working with the camera, and take it up to one of the corners in one of the back roads that I ride motorcycles on that a lot of people love to ride on because it's a nice twisty road. And I decided to take the S5 Mark II, my 70-200 f2.8, and the Sigma 24-70 f2.8, the actual L-mount version of it. And actually take these to go in real world, testing with the 30 frames per second, with the AFC tracking, as I said, in set 4, because that's the mode that I know, I'm doing motorsports, and really actually see what kind of results I could get. I am by no means a sports photographer. I do it casually. I am much more a slow-paced landscape, night photography, that kind of person. That's my bread and butter. This is very outside of my realm, and what I'm basically going to say here is, if I can do it, I know for damn sure you all can do it. And the fact that we now have PDAF in the system makes it that much easier. I've seen some amazing photos over on the Facebook groups from users that are using the current S5 and getting some stellar shots. PDAF is just that extra level now, that it makes it that much easier, less to really kind of have to think about. So, as we can see here, I've got the metadata up. I've got, this is 1/5000th of a second, f2.8, 1600 ISO, and this is with the 24-70 2.8 art lens. So this is the actual Sigma native L-mount lens on it. And I'm using the Zone AF mode. So let me actually show you my setup. So for my focusing setup, I come in here and I use the zone detection with human detection on. And then I set my target to the middle size. You'll see we have a large size, mid size, and small. So I would set this to medium, and then I would leave it in autofocus continuous. And then for my focus custom settings, I was in set 4. So that's how my camera was set up. And then I jumped back and forth between standard, color profile, and vivid, just because I like the way our vivid images come across. It's actually, I really like the contrast and the punch you get out of it. So what did we get out of this? So this is a set of images that are going, let's see, how many images do we have here in this particular set? So I did a grouping of 109 images here. So this is literally hit the shutter button, let the thing run, and just go at it. So when I come in here and we're going to crop in here, we'll see as I'm running through each of these, I'm literally in focus at each one of these frames. It is locked on and it's going and going and going and going. So it, even with an L-mount lens that is not from Panasonic, this is the Sigma 24-70. You'll see, and I'll move up with the head, you'll see that we nailed focus. It's following through. It's staying on the bike. It's keeping the range there. Even when I made a little bit of a jump because I banged my elbow into my bike, I'm able to keep focus on this subject all the way through. And it just keeps going. So yeah, across the board, you'll see that our first attempt, when you're going to be doing this kind of photography, tracking photography, we're able to maintain and keep the subject in focus. And these were all shot at f2.8. So yeah, it's 70 millimeter, 2.8. It's not the most shallow depth of field. But then if I come out here and let's go back in and let's take a look at another set of images here. I think it is, where is, it's in my set 5. Yeah, my set 5 here. So when we take a look, I've got another set here. Again, zone focusing, or the zone mode, and we've got that human detection. So if human detection isn't able to detect a person on a bike, which is gonna be more difficult because when a person's tucked in on a motorcycle, you'll see that the human detection or the human detection may not pick it up. That's why I like to use the box. You'll see that again, we're locked right on this motorcycle. And through the entire frame, how tight we're able to keep on this. And yeah, I'm zoomed in here, but if I back all the way out and we go through this, you'll see just how locked on this setup is. All the way through, coming towards the frame, across frame, and then away frame. So Steve asks, how fast was the motorcycle going? So the white Panigale, this guy was doing probably 20 or 30 at this point because there was a car in front of him, which as I come through, you'll be able to sneak the car. There's another bike up in front of this guy. So he wasn't going the fastest. But if I go to one of my first sets of his bike, or actually, I can actually do this with my with the other Aprilia here. So this is with the Aprilia as they're coming through. And again, this is the Sigma 24-70 2.8 at f4 at 3200 ISO to keep my shutter speed up. You'll see that he was doing probably about 40 miles an hour, and then at the slowest point, maybe hit about 35 as he actually made the hairpin turn. And you'll see that, yeah, we're locked right on this subject as we're going through the entire frame of images here. And when we talk about the panning and that motion correction and that blur, the electronic shutter correction, I forget who was asking that one. I think that was a question from, oh, it's way up here. Somebody asked the question up here. So anyway, so the fact that we're doing the skew correction in camera as you're taking these photos is kind of really evident here. You'll see that with the way typically when you're panning and you're using an electronic shutter, this is where you would see that post would actually look kind of like this. You'd see that it would be leaned over. And the speed that this guy was going, like I said, this guy was doing probably around 40 miles an hour right up until the end when he hit maybe about 35 and then ducked through the corner there. You'll see that it kept everything nice and straight through the entire frame, even as we keep going all the way through. And then, as I said, the different set modes on the S5 Mark II when it comes to focusing, the different set modes are what are going to allow you to have a subject be tracked using the subject detection modes as well as also using the zone modes, and maintain that the biker here is still in focus even when he goes behind the tree, until he is completely obscured from the tree and the focus finally comes back. But he had already been out of the frame for 3 or 4 shots by that point, and it just keeps going and going. Let's take a break here and take a look at some more of those questions that came in. Let's see here. Thoughts on feedback on the AF menu system, visuals, and suggestions for improvement for bounding boxes and modes. I take it you have watched the DP review article or read the article. I have not yet. I'm curious to see what they say about it. We're always looking to improve things. Currently, right now, this is how our UI looks. It's a carryover from basically how long people have been using the LUMIX cameras. But we're never opposed to anything. It's a matter of whether or not we would make the system work and how much it would take educating people to understand what the new system is. But yeah, if you always have those recommendations, drop them in the chat, drop them in the primarily drop them in the comments after the video. The chat gets hard to follow through, especially now that we've had such high chat volume over the last couple of weeks. So once the video's up, if you have recommendations or things you'd like to see, drop them in the comments. It'll be easier for me to go through those and actually compile them and get them to our team in Japan. I pre-ordered the moment the live event ended on B&H, but it's saying status backordered. Anyone else having that issue? The launch event, that is. Different dealers, different websites will call what a backorder or a pre-order is different names. I wouldn't be too concerned yet. If you were one of the first people that jumped in there, higher probability that you're going to get it, as long as the dealer ordered enough to cover what they expected backorder wise. But definitely check with B&H in your case. Let's see here. Can I set focus limit in camera in the way similar to what you can do on some lenses with a switch? If the info about the actual distance is not there, setting fractions would also be nice. So we will go in here, take a look at my camera. And one of the other things here is you'll see that we have focus limiter on this camera. I can come in and actually set my distances. So I can come in and say, okay, hey, I want my close focus distance to be that. So I want to set this with my white balance. So that's my near set. And I want to set my far set. So I would click this and set my with ISO 2. Now what you'll see is that when I have this set up and focus limiter is on, now focus is going to only work within those ranges when it comes to things like subject detection, the range that it's going to work with. So you can do this on the fly with any lens that you work with. If you have a lens that has focus limiter on it, like something like this, which one is this? This is the 150 to 600. If you've got something like this where you've got focus limiter options here, those are going to be done on the lens. So you have different options there. Let's see here. Richard Wong mentioned Magnify from AF Point, showing it does track animal eyes. Are you familiar with it? Technically, yes. Our focusing system, while we don't have an actual visual representation of the animal's eyes being the priority for focus, our system is biased towards animal eye detection. It's a matter of just the UI, and that we're not, at this point, not confident enough to say, not confident, that's a bad word for it. We're not ready yet to say animal eye detection on the system. But if you've used these cameras for a while, you know that when you are doing autofocus and you're using the animal detection, it's almost always biasing towards the head of the animal or the eyes of the animal. So it does it. If you go into the camera menu, and I'm going to jump back to the camera menu at this point, actually. So if you go back into the camera menu and say I go into playback, which let me see if it'll let me do this while I have everything all rigged up here. I wasn't thinking about going into this menu. Throw a memory card in here quick. Go on to here. So if I go into the menu, one of the things you'll see under the playback menu is that you have this option here called Magnify from AF Point. So if I turn this on and then go back out, what you'll see is that as I'm looking at these different images, when I start to zoom in, if there is a subject detected, and you're using that mode, it's going to actually go through and say, hey, all right, I'm going to focus on this point. This is where you were. And when you go to zoom in, you'll be able to get that information shown there. Mindo, anything on the X version yet? Nothing yet on the X version. A little bit of patience and we'll have more information for y'all soon. Last time you mentioned Sigma is considered first party, so will we get linear focus control on Sigma? What are the chances? So linear manual focus fully depends, when you're doing manual focus, fully depends on the motors that the brand uses for that lens. They have to use very high precision motors to get different levels or different granularity. Right now, like I said, I have the Sigma 24-70 f2.8 on this camera, and I can show you that if I go into display. If I scroll down here, I'll show you 24-70 f2.8 art DGDN. So this is the modern 24-70 designed for mirrorless. So if I set this camera to manual focus and go into the menu, go down into the gear menu, and then go to the lens options, you'll see focus ring control. I can set it to linear, and I can go into set, but because of the motors they chose and the granularity that they chose on this lens for the design, it's 360 or 720 are the two individual ranges or maximum. Where if I go to something like the 24 millimeter, there it is. If I go to something like the 24 millimeter DGDN, the F2, I have more granular control over linear manual focus. So it's there. They're doing it. And whether or not you use their dock to use their version of focus throw, or you go into the camera and you use what's available, there is linear manual focus available on the Sigma lenses. It's just a matter of what focus motors and what controller they used for their ring. The information's there. The chances of it are actually very high because if you go and look at Sigma's website, a large number of their lenses have it. It's just a matter of what level of linear manual focus they have. So, thoughts on a truly compact rangefinder S-series camera? Blink twice if you like how it sounds. I don't have to blink. I would love to see a rangefinder full-frame mirrorless camera from us. The fact is, I don't know if we'll see one. The reality is that so many users in Micro Four Thirds that loved the GX8, and I know I'm probably flaming a bunch of people here because I mentioned the GX8 or the GM cameras. They were great cameras. They are cult classics. Maybe not necessarily the best selling across the board. They're awesome cameras. The reality is that mass market, the more users across the board prefer DSLM style cameras. Flat type mirrorless rangefinder style cameras are fun. Like I said, I would love to have one. My LX100 is one of my more favorite point and shoot cameras. I have a GX85. I got a GX9 back there that I play around with every once in a while. It's just a matter of whether or not we, when we get to that point, if there's space for one. But yeah, I would love to see a rangefinder type. Do I think it's going to happen anytime soon? Probably not. But yeah. Really don't know what else to say on that one these days. Reinhardt, high res should be possible with AE bracketing, and the settings in bracketing should be more flexible, plus or minus 2 EV per shot. We've passed the bracketing question on to the engineers a lot, actually. So I'm not sure what the status of changing what the bracket difference is between each image. And as far as high resolution shot bracketing goes, I can pass it on to them. Honestly, that's the kind of stuff that as we get more people asking about it and more requests for it, the higher the likelihood is. It's not something that's been widely asked for. I know that there's a couple people that have asked, but it's not a wide ask at this point yet. So if that is something, keep asking. Like always, I make zero promises that these things that we talk about on these streams will make it to the cameras, but you have my commitment that they will be given to our team and that they will be voiced as requests from the community. So, let's see here. Reinhardt, will the 2X offer different hardware, and can photographers get options from this? The S5, the Mark II X, slightly different set of hardware and software mix. As far as photographers go, there's not really that big of a difference between the cameras when it comes to photographers. Actually, there's no difference for photographers. If you're someone who just likes a totally blacked out design camera, the X is going to be awesome. I've had hands-on with one, and it's gorgeous. I love the way the thing looks. But yeah, that's just kind of how it is. Let's see here. Can the S5 Mark II or X tether to Capture One, capture apps for Android, iOS wirelessly, or via cable? Capture One tethering support does not exist at this time. That is something that you as the community, if you demand from Capture One, you have to let them know. We provide all of the tether information in a public SDK to be integrated into programs, and everything they need to know is publicly available. So if you ask for it and demand it from them, you're more likely to see it. When using live cropping or focus transition, is the final output 1080p? Good. Well, that's a video question, but I'll answer it quick. Live cropping on the S5 Mark II, you can do 4K live cropping now. So, but we'll talk about more of the video stuff, not next week, but the following week. Okay. It really all comes down to the question: X or not X? What if I really don't need ProRes, codecs, and OLI, but I need live streaming capabilities? Got to go for the X at that point. There's also the reason why the cameras are only $200 price difference here in the US. You've got $19.99 for the S5 Mark II body. You got $21.99 for the S5 Mark II X body when they come out. It's $200 difference between them. You get a totally different design camera. If you really need the streaming capabilities at that point, just go with the X. If that is truly like a defining point for you. The Mark II base model will not be getting those features. It will not get OLI. It won't get the ProRes options, and it won't get the IP streaming functionality. It will get RAW over HDMI through a paid firmware update, which is going to cost $200, at least here in the US. So if you know that those are certain features that you absolutely need, then go with the X model. What is a good flash brand system that works with the S5? That will work with the S5. Well, there's obviously R flashes if you're someone who uses R flashes. Or I use the Godox, the V862. When you buy it, you just buy the one that's for the Olympus TTL protocol, and it's compatible with our system. So it'll be perfectly fine. Do you think future versions of live composition will get more options? Would love to be able to do faster than 1/1.6 speed. I know that we're always working to evolve that system. It is we are the only one in full frame that's doing it. So that's something that we're looking at trying to, kind of go up with. But at this point, it's kind of the feature set that it is. If there are recommendations or things you want to see, just let us know. Let's see here. Will the fan help in reducing noise for very long exposure shots like the Milky Way shots? Theoretically, yes, it should. Because of the way that our cooling system is designed on the S5 Mark II, and if you read, I think it was an interview given by the product team. I think it was featured over on DC Life. There's a couple other sites that are sharing it. I know Dan Hopkins shared it over in the Facebook group. If you read that article and translate it to English, they talk about how the cooling solution was designed and some of the incredibly unique things that we have about our system in the components that it cools. Anyone that's done long exposure, like really long exposure work knows that as you're recording longer and longer and longer, the camera heats up. And as the camera heats up, image quality typically goes down because now you're introducing thermals into the noise pattern, which the hotter a sensor goes, the noisier it gets. So while you're using this camera and you're going to do ultra long exposure, you have full access to crank this camera at the fan at full speed if you want. That will keep the internals cool because it's just like anything else. You can still cool the system down even when you're running normal day-to-day photography with it. It's how we can do and be an actual true hybrid camera like they're supposed to be. It doesn't matter how many photos or videos you take, you're not running into thermal problems on our camera. So yeah, you can, it definitely will help. I'm not someone that could give you a numbered or a quantitative reason as to, what to look for and what it helps, what it doesn't help, that kind of thing. But yeah, it will help. Let's see here. Would they be adding HEIF into the cameras? We've asked numerous times about this. HEIF photo files, for those that don't know, it's high efficiency imaging format. It gives you a higher bit depth JPEG styled image. The current problem with HEIF files, and even like when we had our HSP files in previous cameras, is really that, for one, a lot of software does not actually play nice with those files. If you're someone who uses, like I use HEIF files on my Galaxy Z Fold and on my iPhone. I use them because I get space savings. But some of the stuff that people don't realize that happens under the hood with mobile devices is that when you go to load those files into something like Instagram or Facebook, they're being converted to JPEG and uploaded as a JPEG. They're not being uploaded as HEIF files. So right now, HEIF is in a bit of a weird place because some programs can edit it, some programs can't. Some operating systems know what to do with the files, others don't. If you're in Windows, HEIF files are not a natively supported image. So typically you have to make sure that you're downloading some sort of codec from Windows or Microsoft to do it. I haven't confirmed that with Windows 11 after I updated my computer, but I know on Windows 10 you had to do that. So HEIF, it's something we're looking into. Whether or not you see it in cameras soon, not sure. But let's see here. Well, with older models, focus peaking seems a bit hit or miss sometimes. Is there any change in this regards now with the new models? Work with phase detect, waiting on that Mark IIX. So focus peaking when you're looking at the back of the screen, what I think a lot of people noticed model to model differences are screen resolution. The higher the resolution of the display, the harder it's going to be to see focus peaking and have it accurate. Think of it as kind of like a triangle, right? You can have an ultra high resolution rear screen, you can have focus peaking, and then you can have accuracy. You can't have all three at once. Because in order for an ultra high resolution display to show focus peaking accurately, you're looking at smaller pixels on a given screen size. That means that they're harder to see. If you want them easier to see, you have to give up accuracy, because now you have to say, instead of 1 pixel accuracy, I have to do, say, 10 or 20 for it to be seen on any resolution display. Rear screens, it's one of the reasons why when you look at the rear LCD panels of cameras, they're not ultra high resolution. They're all floating anywhere between that 1 to 2.3 megapixel screen size, because anything bigger than that, details start to become very hard to read because of scaling. But yeah, that's kind of how it goes. Okay, so I wanted to talk about a couple of the other things here before we go too far. And I'm going to run this stream longer than normal, just because I'm behind on the things I wanted to talk about. So I mentioned in the description that we also have this feature called, why am I blanking on the name of it? Wow, it's been a long day. Sheer overlay in our cameras. And if you've ever used or done product photography, and I'll go back to this, if you've ever done product photography where you're photographing so many multiple objects together, but you want to maintain the spatial positioning within a photo, you used to have to do this either by putting a mark on the actual kind of surface that you're photographing, and you would put your subject in there. In video users, we call this blocking. You would be setting up a position and say, I need you to hit this mark because that's where I need my framing to be. Well, in the photography side, we have the ability to add sheer overlay in the camera. And this can be done a couple of ways. You can, one, change the transparency, whether you want it high or low. You can select the image that you want. So in this case, I'll go through and let's just grab this image that I took before. You also have the ability to say reset it, power off, and then now display image when the shutter is pressed. So when I'm half pressed, you'll see that we get that. If I come out of that, you'll see that I have that image set up now where my framing is. So I can take a look here and say, all right, that anamorphic lens is a little off from the framing that I'm at. My overall look of this image is a little wrong. How do I get this to kind of look and match up the way I want it? So you have these different tools to be able to frame up your image how you want it to look and do it all in camera. You can also now, which is one of the bigger additions with this setup, is that you can also do this in video now too. So shear overlay just makes it easier. It's called onion skinning in some areas, because it literally, just as you saw, it puts like this kind of onion skinned image over your frame that lets you align subjects with it. Makes it great even for portrait photographers. If you know a very specific look that you like to go with in framing, set up onion skinning and you'll know, like, okay, I want my one subject needs to be here, my other subject needs to be on this side of the frame, and I don't want them kind of overlapping each other because I'm going to be doing composites later. Yeah, just make sure that you get your shear overlay set up here. Let's see here. There were some others here. Looks Live, please convey to the Panasonic team, thank you for listening to your customers. I can't wait to get the S5 Mark II X to add to my two S5s. Awesome. Thank you for the positive notes. I always love hearing that. Can you elaborate more on rolling shutter correction? How does it work? My impression is that it will only correct vertical lines and does not help much with fast action sports. So motion correction while you're doing panning shots or things like that. We've done this in the cameras for a while. However, it was always done where you needed to do it in post. So you would actually take the image, then go into the playback menu and do skew correction. It takes a number of bits of information. So the scanning speed of the sensor, with where things should be. So it's designed to take an image that gets skewed and bring it back up. Of course, there are other issues when it comes to rolling shutter or skew. Ultra complex images with rolling shutter are a little more difficult to correct. And it may not be perfect, but it's the fact that pretty much any other camera that's using electronic shutter is still also going to suffer from some level of skew when it comes to electronic shutter. In my case, I've been able to 100% be able to confidently go out, photograph motorsports, and, you know, motorcycles coming at me 40, 50 miles an hour, coming straight towards me, panning across and around as we saw before, and not have any major instance of distracting rolling shutter or situations where rolling shutter is just not even really visible there. If it's there, it's so minuscule that it's not something that you're actually going to pick up. What I challenge a lot of people to do is, unlike video, where rolling shutter is a constant thing that's always going to be present in your view because you're viewing at minimum 24 frames per second, in photography, go out, take a whole bunch of pictures, show them to people that are not of the crazy mind that all of us are in the tech craze side of this. Show them the images, tell them what you think. I've sent images that I've shot in electronic shutter, panning with those motorcycles to people before, and they've been head over heels. They love them. It's content. Yes, would you want something to be perfectly perpendicular? Yeah, and you can go into the mechanical shutter. You drop down in frame rate, but you can do that. And you don't have rolling shutter. It's just a matter of whether or not your client is, one, ever going to see it. Is it something that actually is a true impact, or is this something that we as a community have made such a big deal that is not an actual real deal when it comes to making money with photography or video? Video, it's a little more of a point, but to be honest with you, even the highest end cinema cameras that are producing some of the largest budget blockbuster movies are using rolling shutter. So I think maybe the conversation needs to be put a little bit more in place these days. What's the most asked request by users to pass over to the LUMIX technical team? That's a hard one. There's a lot. There's a lot of things that are not even remotely possible that get asked, like bring phase detect to cameras that don't have the hardware. But yeah, I'd have to think about that one a little bit more. FC, what advantage of HEIF over RAW except for file size? There is actually zero advantage of HEIF over RAW. The only difference is that HEIF can get you a 10-bit JPEG style file. RAW in our cameras are 14-bit and greater, so you're not actually getting any advantage. You have less flexibility with an HEIF file. Let's see here. Does the S5 Mark II have a secret animal eye detect? Not necessarily secret. You know, we just kind of have, we've always biased towards the eyes. What is your take on focus and recompose method for DSLR users when switching to the S5 Mark II with PDAF? My take on it is use whatever works for you. I came up in photography and videography, well, primarily photography. I always started in photography first. I always came up doing center point focus and recompose. That's always been the way that I've worked. It's worked incredibly well on all of my previous Lumix cameras, and even when I played around with Canon cameras and Fuji when I was working in retail and had options of, you know, whatever camera I wanted to shoot with. If it works for you, keep using it. There's nothing that any of us say is going to always be 100% applicable to your particular shooting style. What I will say, though, is with the S5 Mark II, if you are someone who relied very heavily on single point focus, lock in, and recompose, you can 100% use the S5 Mark II in pretty much always continuous autofocus. Just leave the thing in CAF and move your focus point around and compose that way. It's going to take a little bit of time to get yourself comfortable with that style of shooting. As I first started doing it, I noticed that I would like get my subject focused and then I would move the camera and be like, wait, why did my focus move off that way? Well, duh, because my focus point was already offset to the location I want it to be in. It just takes a little bit of practice. Like anything, as soon as you get the camera, there is that period where you need to kind of remember and understand that you're working with a new system. I don't care what the camera is. If you're buying the next generation Lumix camera, if you're buying the next generation Canon camera because you came from the previous one, every new camera has its own intricacies that you want to kind of get yourself comfortable with before you jump out and go into the real world shooting with it. Or if you go out and shoot with the cameras in the real world, just know that you may, for that first couple of weeks, while you're first getting yourself used to the camera, you may have maybe not the best capture rate because you're getting yourself used to it. And with the S5 Mark II, this is going to be one of the biggest things, is that we've changed the focusing system. We are now PDAF, as we've said numerous times and everyone online has, you know, commented about. It requires less thought than we did on the DFD system or the contrast-based system. And a lot of the tuning that people have come up with over the years for the contrast system do not work on this camera. So if you're someone who's getting ready to pick up your S5 Mark II and it's on its way, or you've just got it already, and you're jumping back and forth between photo and video, and you had different custom settings in there for how you needed to tune the camera for your work, forget about them. On the Mark II, start everything at base 0 and tune from there. If you go in there and start throwing in all of the old settings that you used to use, where like maybe you have speed set really high and sensitivity set really low, you may end up actually causing way more headache for yourself because the system does not respond the same way. Let's see here. Honest opinion of GH6 features versus S5 Mark II outside of AF. Worth the trade if primarily focuses video with a minor focus on photography. That's a tough one. If you're into photography, the GH6 has a number of different advantages. One, you've got the handheld high resolution shot mode. Resolution is pretty much a wash between the two. You're 25 versus 24. If you're doing wildlife and birding photography, Micro Four Thirds has the advantage of longer lenses that are smaller in size. So your kit can be smaller. If you're as far as a video user goes, you've got the CF Express cards, which means you can do ProRes internally. The S5 Mark II X, you'll do it to an SSD for anything over 4K. It's a toss-up. Truthfully, it's a toss-up between the two. If you want ultra-shallow depth of field, go with the S5 Mark II. If you're super comfortable and you love what you get out of the GH6, stay with the GH6. Okay, so some of the other things that we just wanted to cover here, and it's a topic that I want to cover specifically because of a question that we got at the beginning of the stream, and that is, let me pull up Silky Pics here. This question this portion is specifically to address some comments that came in earlier before the stream started, that when we click live on the stream, it clears some of the previous questions. And that is that some users were saying that when they played around with the images from the S5 Mark II, the JPEGs, they felt that the higher ISOs, 6400 and higher, had not great shadow information in detail. Well, there's two things to keep in mind. One, a lot of times you have to make sure that, one, when you're first testing a camera, did somebody change any of the settings in the different profiles for the camera? Whenever I was actually demoing a camera to somebody when I was in retail, and I still do this now, if I'm putting a camera in front of somebody and they're wanting to see what the result is out of camera, I make sure to factory reset the camera before handing it to them, because you want to have that experience as fresh. You don't know what settings the previous person that had hands-on with it changed. When it comes to color profiles, you have the capability of changing things like noise reduction and sharpness and saturation and all that kind of stuff. So if somebody had been playing with that beforehand, and I'm judging my opinion of those images from that, it's not accurate, because that's somebody's, play around with the color profiles. So the reason I'm looking in Silky Pics here is that the question specifically came up about 6400 ISO. And 6400 ISO on the S5 Mark II is freaking clean. It's way more than usable for whatever I want to do with it. Is there noise? Yes, because you're at 6400 ISO. But is there any issue in the shadows? No. I have no issues in any of the shadows that come from this image. And to push that even further, when I do my evaluation of whether or not I like a camera's image, I go into the software and I pull all sharpening or all smoothness or what's called noise reduction off of a particular image. In Silky Pics, that's called pulling the smoothness slider all the way down. If I leave it at default and go in, I get this weird kind of soft, not too great looking image. But once I pull this down, it gives me in my opinion, an infinitely better product to actually work with when I want to bring this into something like Lightroom or whatever. So what that means is if I come in here and let's go to Lightroom again. When I go in here, if I'm looking at two images side by side, so if I go to my 6400 ISO images, so I've got 6400 there, and let's do 64, nope, that's 200. Let's go 6400, RAW on the left, JPEG on the right. You see just how different the processing is. In-camera processing right out of the camera produces a smoother looking image. So you're going to lose some detail in the shadows, especially in the grip material here. If you look at the grip on this part here, you see how much more detail the RAW file has versus how less detail the JPEG image has. This can all be tuned. You can go in and say, I want less noise reduction on my JPEG image. I want more noise reduction on my JPEG image. But taking that first look to say, oh, at 6400 ISO, there's got to be a problem because when I looked at the one camera, maybe something doesn't look right. You got to actually play around with some of these files because, yes, you can clean some of this stuff up, and the JPEG engine does a pretty good job at creating, usable, good, higher ISO images. But if you're someone who's ultra critical about detail and image quality, you're going to be shooting in RAW, and you're going to go through, and what I recommend is do your noise reduction in external software. So go into whatever program you're going to use, strip the noise reduction out of it, edit the image the way you want it to, and then use stuff like Topaz or a program like that to get you what your actual ISO cleanliness is. Because even if I go into this and I go all the way up to 51,200, so this is the maximum ISO that you can possibly go on this camera, 51,200. Is it great? No. No, I would not use 51,000. But if you look at the detail that I actually know that I have here in the raw file, that I can still pull back if I use a better noise reduction algorithm, I've got a file that's way better to work with in general. The details that you lose in JPEGs through stuff like this. Like if I look at the writing here on the switch versus the writing here on the raw file, I can clearly make out the numbers here, where here some start to kind of like fuzz into each other. So play around with the files that you have. Now that the raw software is starting to come out, there is Silky Pix. You have to understand Silky Pix is also maybe not the best program if you've never used it before. It takes a little bit of getting used to, but you get all that kind of control to actually play with these images. These files are still some of the best raw files I've ever worked with, both from true color accuracy, but also from general flexibility. I can take these files and make them look like whatever I want. And that brings me to probably one of the last points that I have time for today. And that is, we have the ability in the color profiles now to use what's called real-time LUT. And there's two ways that this works on the S5 Mark II. You have the actual color profile called real-time LUT, which is based in Vlog. So I can come in here, I can look at my LUT files and say, oh, Vlog 709, that's the one I want to work with. Cool. Or I can come in here and go to My Photo Style 1, which is one of 10 available on the camera. Come down here, change what my base profile is. So if I like shooting in Cinelike D2, which I know there's actually a lot of people that really like shooting on Cinelike D2, I can shoot on Cinelike D2, take a standard photo, so literally just take one photo, bring it into Photoshop, do the edits that I would normally do. And I recommend doing this in Photoshop and leave the layers visible. So you want to add a little more contrast, you want to add a little more vibrance, you want to, seriously tweak the colors and pull out one of those kind of looks that someone has online. Like I was playing around with Cyberpunk's look, with like hard edge lining and all that kind of stuff. I can play with all of those looks, then take them. Photoshop will export out a .cube file for you. Load it on my card, come in here, and under this profile, because I built this based on Cinelike D2, come into real-time LUT, load this look onto that file, and know that now, as I'm shooting, I can have my JPEG look, the style that I like to work with, how I edit my photos, have that already done right on camera. Now, if I shoot RAW and JPEG, the RAWs will be just the Cinelike D2 in this case. They'll be whatever your base color profile is. But I have that flexibility now to say, I don't want to deal with RAW. I want to do all my editing on my computer and just save out the look. What we would used to do is like an XML file to load in the edits that you've done before. Now I just save them out as a cube or a look file, load it onto the camera, and the camera knows to take Cinelike D2 in my case for my demo, use Cinelike D2, the edits I've done in Photoshop, and just apply them on my JPEGs. It is one of the coolest features that I think a lot of people are starting to get into, and I've actually seen a big interest all of a sudden spike in, well, what are LUTs? How do they work? Where can I get them? And this will work with the video stuff too. If you're a photographer who also does some video and you want to get stills that are matching the color palette of the video content or a look that you like in movies, load that look onto your S5 Mark II under real-time LUT and shoot away. You've got JPEGs that'll already be basically pre-color graded to work with. So yeah. Let's see here. Can you tether shoot with LUMIX systems into Lightroom? Not at this point. You'd have to press on Adobe for that one. Sacred City. Only shot in 51,000 and let it become your style. Mr. 51,000 sounds like an influencer, a rich influencer. Yeah, there you go. Love your lives from CES. I've ordered the 50mm SF1.8. Will it work out with the new focusing system or the S Pros? Like I have 70-200 2.8 after firmware update. So yeah, you do not need firmware updates on. Truthfully, you do not need a firmware update on any of the lenses. They're already optimized for PDAF on the S5 Mark II. The firmware updates that are coming for the lenses are specifically to address zooming while focusing. Because of the CDAF system that we used previously, you were not able to do continuous focus tracking while you zoomed a lens. Now that PDAF is there, now we can do that. We just have to update the lenses, all the zoom lenses to do that. The 50mm f1.4 got a firmware update because if you've used this lens before, one, you realize how big it is, but also the fact that it uses two styles of motors. It uses a linear and a stepping motor. So the firmware update helps manage both of those different motor types to optimize it for PDAF. So yeah. Always keep your lenses updated, but if you're just buying any of the lenses right now, the 1.8 series, any of that stuff, you're good to go right out of the box. You don't really need to worry about firmware updates right away. Flicks, when using manual lenses, is the focal length info written to the EXIF data? That's a good question. I have not tested it recently. I will do some tests and let you know. I just have to find where my Leica M lens is. It's somewhere on my mess that I call the desk, and go in. But you do have a lot of customization that you can make on the camera specifically for that. All right, I got time for one more thing to take a look at. Eduardo, how about the focus speed? The new 20-70 is super fast. Any Panasonic lens as fast? Yeah, if you read independent reviewers of it, we're challenging Sony in a number of focusing areas. So I'm biased. We're better. That's kind of where my point is. So the last thing that I want to just kind of point out here, and I have the camera off of HDMI so I can show this to you actually on my frame if I can remember what menu it's in, is there was a question before about the Astro Photography or night photography with the cameras. And one of the things that actually really kind of pushes in that side is that, one, you're working at night. You're working in low light levels, and the rear screens on our cameras are bright. The S5 and the S series platform in general have really, really bright screens. So for one, that can be a really big positive for some. It can be a negative for others. But our screens are actually very bright on our camera. So what we've done for nighttime photographers or astro photographers is we've added a mode called night mode. And if I come in here and get it set up and show you, you'll see that we have this option called night mode in the camera. Now, what night mode does, and I've been able to show this at least only just kind of through the display there, but what I can do is go onto my menu and actually literally turn the display red. So I can literally put this in a night mode. And what this is used for is in situations in ultra low light, just like what our phones do when we're going to bed at night, it removes the blue light from the display, which means it's going to be easier on your eyes when you're working at night. And you're going to be using things like either the night mode for the ability to have the screen red, so it's easier on your eyes. You also have the ability to come in here and use things like Live View Boost, which is kind of like Constant Preview, but not. Live View Boost only boosts the display gain. It doesn't try to mimic your exposure, where Constant Preview will actually mimic your shutter speed and your aperture. So you have a bunch of different functionality there when you're working with it. And that's the level that a lot of our engineers went through. And there's so many more things on this camera that I could spend probably 6 hours straight on a conversation about this, which maybe one day we will. Maybe one day we'll literally do like a Saturday stream, though I'm in the US, so Saturdays would be, maybe not best for everybody, but maybe one day we'll actually just kind of do a literal hangout all day, and people can just come and go as they want, and we'll just literally talk about cameras, have some lunch together, whatever, and kind of go through it, because there's that much stuff that we can just keep talking about with these cameras. I'm going to make one last round here of questions to see before I have to call today's stream. I think I saw a lot of them. Dennis says, on the S5 Mark II, can the C1, C2, C3 mode on the top dial be used to save video profiles in addition to photo profiles? Please clarify what those custom modes are. Yes, 100%. The C1, 2, and 3, plus all of the ones that are software bound under C3, 100% can be set up for whatever mode you want on the camera. The way you set them up is you put the camera in the mode that you want to save under the custom 1, 2, or 3. Set the camera up the way you want it, the color profile you like, the focus mode you like, so on and so forth. Then you go into the menu and you save it into that slot. When you do that, next time you go to C1, 2, or 3, it's what you had it set for. And yeah, it's photo or video. It's a really easy way to jump back and forth between the two. Just make sure that in your camera, you turn Creative Video Combined Set under the menu. You make sure all of those options are the the camcorder icon, and you are golden. Let's see here. I think it looks pretty good on the rest of the questions. Well, for now, I'm sure I'm probably missing some stuff. Can the shutter be closed while changing lenses? Unfortunately, not on this camera. We have brought it up to see if it's something that that can be added via firmware. Shutter closed while changing lenses is a very polarizing conversation when it comes to the industry. It is much easier, and I know some people out there are, point out, they're like, oh, it's a ridiculous reason to say not to do it. It is infinitely easier to damage your shutter blades than it is to damage your sensor. Sensor dust comes off. Putting something into the shutter blades and bending them, that's a total, your camera doesn't function anymore. If you're dropping something hard enough in that it would damage a sensor, you're going to damage the blades as well. And if you're dropping something light enough on the blades that it doesn't damage them, you wouldn't damage the cover glass anyway. So it's a very toss-up, but we listen to what all of you say and the feedback you give. I just don't know if we're really going to be able to do it right away, or what the kind of challenges would be there. That's a bit above what my pay grade would be. So, yeah. So, with that, thank you all so much. These are obviously not the end of these conversations. We will be continuing them. Some programming notes next week. I actually am fortunate enough to have an interview with Emily over at Micro Four Nerds. So if you want to hear our conversation, make sure to tune in for that. It is going to be a recorded stream, just because of timing and schedules and stuff. So make sure to tune in next week. We're going to have Emily on the broadcast to have some conversations with us. And then tomorrow, for those of you that want to hear more about the launch of the S5 Mark II, I'm joining Caleb Hoover over on his channel for a chat tomorrow morning, I believe at 10 a.m. 10 a.m. Central Time. So if you haven't already, or you don't already, go take a look at Caleb Hoover. Go check out the stream. Join us on that stream. It's going to be a lot of fun. And yeah, as we said, chat with Emily next week. And then, yeah, the week after that, we'll be back into more S5 Mark II conversations. Yeah, I hope all of you have an awesome rest of your day. I hope you have an awesome weekend. Those of you that are getting your S5 Mark IIs, this is going to be a shameless plug. But with your S5 Mark IIs, if you post on social media, use the hashtag I just dropped down in the chat. I would love to see the work that you all post and the content that you all create with it. There are some amazing photographers and videographers out there, and I'm always out looking for inspiration and trying to see who's out there. So if you get a camera, use that hashtag on any of the social channels. I'll see it. And yeah, what else? That's kind of it. This is like the longest goodbye or end of a stream. So, all right, with that, take care, everybody. talk to you next week, Thursday, 2 p.m. Eastern Time. If you like the video, like it. If you think we deserve it, subscribe. Share it to people that you think are maybe on the fence about an S5 Mark II, and hopefully we can bring them into the family. All right, later.